Welcome to Future Left Podcast. This is Adam Simpson. I'm here, as always, with Casey Rogers. How you doing, Casey?
Howdy doody, everybody.
Alrighty. We're also joined by Michael Bufano, live from Cairo, Egypt. How are you today, Mike?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Adam?
How is the weather yet in Cairo?
You just asked me that like 20 minutes ago.
Well, it was
breaking the fourth wall, Mike.
Separate podcast, Michael. It was a separate podcast.
Different day.
Lock it up. All right. So what we're talking about today is a smartphone app that lets you report suspicious people. Doesn't that sound terrible?
I'm for it.
Good. So we're gonna have a little debate. All right. So the article that will kind of spur this discussion is called "Smartphone App Lets Anyone Report quote suspicious people in quote transitional St. Louis neighborhood." It's by Karima Towns on Think Progress, a product of the Center for American Progress. I love those guys. So this has been described as Uber for cops, which it's an app that allows people to report to police nonviolent criminals, drug dealers, homeless people, and others they feel may be, once again in quotes, suspicious. First started in New Orleans by a real estate developer. Head of a neighborhood security group, and that is not a police officer, obviously, in St. Louis paid $1,200 to use the app to pressure police to crack down on, quote, quality of life issues, such as public urination and homeless people sleeping on the streets. Don't you hate that? And then the St. Louis PD, they haven't even been involved in this process, which I think is terrible. The app encourages people to report suspicious people, full stop. In D.C., recently, not too long ago, there was a controversy about a similar app that was piloted in Georgetown, and wouldn't you know it, an overwhelming majority of those people who were reported happened to be black.
What?
Odd. I know. There was similar issues with apps in California.
That's weird because none of the qualifications specified black. They just specialize poor homeless people.
Suspicious. There's similar issues in California and New York. One of these apps was called, and I'm not even kidding, it's called Sketch Factor. Good. So how do you feel about this, gentlemen?
I think we should start with Mike, since Mike has law enforcement in his family.
I'm probably going to be the outlier here. I kind of like the technology for several reasons. Number one, I think it's the tech itself is great for keeping an eye on the cops themselves, right?
The tech, sure, but not this app. I mean...
Well, not the app itself, but I mean just the tech overall, right? I mean it's, making sure that the cops get put on video if they're doing something wrong. I think it does create more accountability. Now, at the same time, I think it's also positive because it can genuinely help law enforcement officials do their job. If used right, it could help in terms of cracking down, in terms of improving, decreasing crime rates. Now, you're right, there's that horrible aspect where it can be used to
profile.
Further profile African Americans and create problems for that. That I'm obviously not. I condemn any use of this technology for that purpose. But I think it can actually be used for a lot of good.
I've got to say, I don't really know what to think about this because I guess I can imagine that there are crimes associated with people who wander around and aren't tied down to anything. I've always heard about. I didn't look up any numbers, but I know that there's numbers about vagrancy in crime.
70%.
About 70%. That's what I'm going to go with. Donovan Elizondo numbers. Shout out to Donovan Elizondo.
Whenever we say 70%, we mean nothing. We mean we have no data.
Exactly. Let me make that perfectly clear. Anytime I say about and then give some numbers, it's always wrong. And it's always meant to support the thing I'm about to say.
He found a post-it note in his pocket and he just read the note.
But so I know that the more foot traffic generally there is, or the more homelessness there is in an area, usually the higher numbers of crimes you're going to have because people are just literally wandering around on the streets. And but at the same time, it seems like those are also the people who are most easily taken advantage of in our society. So they're already victims in a number of ways, and it seems like it could also be used to further victimize them at the hands of the powerful.
I think the real solution for dealing with homelessness is we have to put more money into hospitals to take care of people that are suffering from severe drug abuse, schizophrenia. So this app isn't going to solve that problem.
Right.
Forget it.
And I've always thought there should be money put towards programs where we send out mental health professionals onto the streets to actually see what we're dealing with in terms of homeless demographics. To see.
Try selling that to a libertarian.
Well, I know, and like most people are going to say that. Most conservatives and libertarians are going to say that's not a worthwhile use of tax money. And also, good luck getting recently graduated psych med students to go out on the streets and talk to homeless people.
Well, if the issue is just about homeless people, I don't know if the issue is just about homeless people. That's the problem. If it is about homeless people, I think we can probably point to like really concrete, data-driven things that help homelessness. I recently attended a thing for Pathways to Housing DC, and basically it's housing first. You get people in a house, and then from there you try to solve their issues with drug abuse, with mental health, with all of these.
But how do you get all the homeless people to a house? Into houses. It's
not necessarily in a house. It could be an apartment. It could be they have a rent. But basically, it's a public program. They get
there was that interesting
article from HUD, from Housing and Urban Development, and that's what they put it to, and it's overwhelmingly successful.
There was a program in Dallas where Adam and I are both from, where they're actually creating a high-rise complex. I don't know if it was high-rise. It's a complex, and they're going to be putting up homeless people there and helping them get work, right?
Right.
Like, and that seems like the most logical way to go about it. But again, it's about allocation of money.
Right. If these apps that we're talking about are just about getting data on what are the things that people are worried about in town, and then we give that data to law enforcement and to local governments, and they try to improve governance that way. That's one thing. But it's another thing if it's just like, this is Georgetown, and I'm seeing someone who is suspicious, and I'm going to report it on the app. That's
right. Well, I think
it plays to our lesser nature.
We can imagine that happening, and I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. But again,
we don't have to imagine it happening. Yeah, we know it happens. It's consistent, unfortunately, with these types of apps.
Well, I know, but the thing is, that's always going to be anecdotal. Like, there's not. That's the problem. Is that we all know it happens, but it's the type of thing where, like, show me the numbers, point to the numbers. Where are the numbers showing that we do that? And it's like, that's what we do. That's just one of the things that we do. Like, we usually deal with undesirables in that we usually deal with them via law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Mike, I want to bring you into this again, but if it's just about homeless people, that's one thing we can address that. But it seems to me that the problem here is that it kind of reminds me of these. Do you remember that? Did you ever guys hear about this story like Yelp for People, where basically you rate humans? And there's like 3 profiles. It was called People, actually. PEEPEL.
No, that sounds like Roman emperor shit.
Yeah, it's terrible. But it allows you to rate someone in 3 categories: professional, personal, and dating. And you can just get on there like, this guy wears hats that I don't like, or something. I don't know what you say. I don't know what you would say.
This person is about 60% good as a person.
This person is suspicious. I like it's these kinds of apps that kind of.
He has dreadlocks.
That kind of yeah.
I mean, let's face it. We all do it in real life, right? We walk up to somebody, we immediately sum them up based on what they're wearing, based on their age, based on just a look on their face, higher life, based on that first encounter. So it's something we do in real life. So I don't see the difference with that and doing it online as well.
It's wrong when we do it in our everyday life, but it's not official. This when we make it official that it becomes a problem.
Oh, we put that stamp on it, and now
right, exactly.
That says
it's systematized. It becomes systematized. Like racism is something that's going to exist in humanity. That's sadly that's part of human
until
psychology.
We see the means of production. That's absolutely true.
Shut up. But it's when we actually give it credence by making it systematic.
Yeah.
Got to create any final solutions.
Yeah, it erodes at your do you have this right, the right to anonymity? Like that someone can Google Michael J. Buffano, I don't know what your middle initial is, and then it comes up with
Bannett.
It's P?
P stands for Paul.
MPB. And then
was that your christened name?
It doesn't matter what his Christian name is. If someone types in Michael P. Bufano into some app and it comes up, he's suspicious. He spits when he talks. You're not gonna like that. That's not. Cool.
It's a given that that's true, but it shouldn't be available to everybody. To base their
we're all degenerates. That's not cool.
Sure.
Yeah. So on that, we'll all come to agreement finally.
Sure. Mike's a horrible person. We can all agree on that.
These apps kind of circumvent? Shut up. Don't these apps kind of circumvent principles of innocent until proven guilty? And again, another problem with this is in St. Louis in particular. This was by a community watch, and the police weren't involved, which seems kind of strange to me. So it kind of undercuts the overall problem.
And proven guilty.
Well, suspicion. Hold on. Suspicion doesn't mean you're being proved guilty. Even getting arrested and getting put in jail and getting arraigned and getting a trial, you're still assumed to be innocent until proven guilty. It's when that gavel comes down and you get proven guilty, that's when you're guilty, right? If guilty before proven innocent is when you get arrested and you're going to jail no matter what, and there's not going to be a trial. So I don't really see that as just because someone looks to be suspicious.
Suspicion is usually a way of I think undercutting notions of guilt and innocence, because while it's a technicality, while you can't say that this person is doing something wrong. Sorry.
Because someone looks suspicious, that's not the same as being proven as being considered guilty before proven innocent.
Technically, but isn't that a way?
Technically,
can that be used as a way of suppressing?
Getting arrested more often, you're more likely to go to jail, right? And so
but do we have a problem with people? Because when they had the Olympics in Brazil and they went through and they got undesirables off the streets and rounded them up, they weren't being prosecuted.
They haven't had the Olympics in Brazil. It's supposed to be soon.
I guess when the committee went there to what was it? Because we remember where they were getting rid of the homeless people. Right.
That's what they're still trying to do. Brazil is in a lot of trouble. Their government's tanking, and they're still supposed to hold the Olympics soon. I'm not sure what.
They're going to hold this multi-billion-dollar event in an area that won't benefit from it whatsoever. Anyway, but so when they
built stadiums out in the middle of nowhere,
exactly.
And they're never going to use them again.
Yeah, and anyway, but do we not have a problem with, even though they're not being prosecuted, rounding up people because they're suspicious? And we know that if an area is largely one particular racial demographic, that people outside of that racial demographic are going to be found suspicious and reported. We've seen it. I'm sure that where in our respective hometowns, we know of areas where we hear about minorities being called in for being suspicious who live in those areas. There's a very affluent area in Dallas called Highland Park, and I actually had a friend whose grandparents lived there. He'd lived there, and he's African American, and he was walking home from school, and the cops were called on him, and he had to had to drive him home and prove that he lived there. And that's not something that, even though he wasn't found guilty of anything, I mean, that's not how someone should be treated in any way. I mean, there's still a violation, I think, of dignity and personhood in being rounded up for being basically undesirable.
I guess that's the problem with these apps I have, is that the technology, in theory, it could be very useful to law enforcement. It could be very beneficial in a lot of different ways, but I don't know if our society is really capable of handling it maturely. And this actually goes back to a debate. It goes back to
that's a great point, right? I'm not even just worried about racial profiling. I mean, just people messing around with the app, right?
Well, exactly.
You imagine the amount of trolls that'll abuse something like.
We have this phenomenon now of people swatting YouTubers, where they call in calls like saying that this person is hoarding weapons, and you actually see the SWAT team breaking in on these guys while they're recording their YouTube videos. Like, that's actually become a thing where people just abuse law enforcement and abuse this sort of thing in just the most egregious ways as a joke. It's a weird form of desensitization.
It's a solid joke. It's a solid joke.
As a goof.
Yeah. Oh. That's why I brick up the front door. You know what I mean? The front door is
and put burlap over the windows.
That's what I'm trying to say, is that I don't know that we're ready for this in terms of it just being appropriated by people with less than great intentions. That's the problem I have.
Well, and also Also, just the connotation that this sort of thing has, like rounding up people on site has connotations of Nazi Germany. And I'm not saying it's Nazi Germany, because we all know that that's great analysis. Just saying that people are Nazis, that's great analysis. We all went to college.
Even if the app led to like police showing up, and just basically, I'm a white male. I don't know if you guys know that, but I'm a white male.
I can tell by your voice.
I know I don't see color, but
shut up.
I worry that like I wouldn't respond very well if someone reported me as suspicious and then cops were like following me around. I mean that goes to like a general sense of marginalization that people of color have to feel. And I'm going to speak for people of color as a white man. I don't know if you guys.
Well, Adam, I don't know if the people out there listening know. Adam used to have dreadlocks, and not because he was trying to appropriate another culture, but because he was a fan of nu metal.
Which really makes me kind of the worst white person. I don't think that the technology is necessarily bad. That's kind of how I feel about it. I just think that it's going to be used really poorly. That's all. And especially, if you're going to be using it, I think the local law enforcement has to be involved. The idea of like a local watch leader. We've seen local watch people who aren't.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Elected, George Zimmerman, and it doesn't go well. And empowering them with certain technology, it concerns me as well.
Well,
I understand that Mike has to go soon, so let's sum up for Mike. So Mike, go ahead and start us off. We'll close this thing now.
Okay, just on a kind of last note, I don't think neighborhood watch groups are. I think they could be a good thing if people are more mindful of their community.
I agree with that. That's fine.
But that means having to have more responsibility. This means being better educated. It means being more tolerant of your fellow men. I think we can become ready for a technology like this, but we have to become less ignorant, and less vulnerable to prejudice. So I think that's something for the future we have to keep in mind. But I think the technology can be a very positive thing.
Well, I think that, and for my closing thing, I think I agree with what Mike just said, but I think we're going to have to look at what sort of tendencies are going to be universals in human behavior. Like, is it a universal that if you give someone a little bit of authority, like George Zimmerman, that you're always going to have the people who go sort of power hungry with it and think they're above the law? How do we avoid something like that? Is it something that can be avoidable? Is it just a quirk of personality? Also, with issues like suspicion, that's always going to be a very nebulous sort of thing that can be exploited and used for all sorts of ends. So while I agree that having more technology involved with law enforcement it has its upside, such as keeping tabs on what police are doing, it can also make things like the undesirable factor, cleaning up the streets, quote unquote, of people that are quote unquote suspicious. It can also make that a lot more frequent in a negative sort of way.
Yes, I agree. I agree with most of this. I mean, we have a little bit of disagreement between the three of us, but really, it comes down for me in terms of community watch and these apps. Any kind of power, informal or formal or otherwise, it has to be accountable in some way, and that's what bugs me about this stuff. I think it would kind of only exacerbate certain problems in certain communities, and I honestly don't know how to mitigate that beyond attacking the sources of bigotry and marginalization generally. I mean, that's the problem. And I see that as being very far away, unfortunately.
Well, so I don't think it's far away. I think it's ongoing.
It is ongoing, but in terms of us being ready for support, like reporting suspicious behavior and it not being a buzzword for young unarmed black men. That's really what I've been dancing around, I suppose.
Sure.
All right. Well, I know Mike has to get to sunny Alexandria. I wish you a safe trip.
From sunny Cairo.
I hear the library's nice, so go there. And that's a terrible joke.
That's where I'm going, to the library.
All scholars around the world cry.
Yeah. So wish you well, Mike. Thanks for joining us today.
See you later, Adam.
Thanks for listening out there.